Chapter 19. Boundaries Tested. The flight back from London was not like the flight there. On the way to the UK, we were two warriors preparing for a siege. On the way back, we were survivors of a battlefield that was still smoldering. I sat in the darkened cabin of the Gulf Stream, the only light coming from the glowing status bars of my monitors. Maya was asleep in the berth behind me, or at least she was pretending to be. I could tell by the cadence of her breathing, it was too deliberate, too rhythmic. She was thinking about Caleb Thorne. She was thinking about the way I had practically carried her out of the Guildhall like a prize I had reclaimed from a thief. My jaw ached from clenching it. The boundary between CEO and protector had dissolved somewhere over the Atlantic. I wasn't just managing a merger anymore, I was managing a perimeter. Seeing Caleb Thorne in that waiter's uniform, blending into the shadows of the Guildhall, had triggered a primal response in me that I couldn't suppress. It was a violation. My territory had been breached, and the target was the only person who made my heart beat for anything other than profit. "You're going to break that glass if you grip it any harder," Maya's voice drifted from the shadows. I didn't turn around. I took a slow sip of the scotch, the liquid burning a trail down my throat. "Go back to sleep, Maya. We'll be in New York in 3 hours." I heard the rustle of silk as she sat up and swung her legs over the side of the berth. She walked toward me, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. She was wearing one of my white dress shirts, a garment that barely reached her mid-thigh, the sleeves rolled up in thick, messy cuffs. She looked fragile and lethal all at once. "I can't sleep when I can feel the rage radiating off you," she said, leaning against the edge of my desk. "Alexander, he was just a ghost. He didn't even speak to us. Security handled it." "He was in the room," I growled, finally looking up at her. "He was within 20 feet of you. He saw you. He watched you dance with me. That is not handled. That is a threat that is still active." "So what's the plan? You're going to build a bigger wall, put me in a deeper cage." "I'm going to do whatever is necessary to ensure he never sees you again." I stood up, the space in the cabin suddenly feeling too small for the both of us. I stepped into her space, my hands finding her waist. The fabric of the shirt was thin, the heat of her skin radiating through to my palms. "The boundaries have changed, Maya. From this second forward, you don't go to the lab without my security detail. You don't leave the penthouse without me. You are officially locked in for your own safety." She didn't flinch. She leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "And what about my work? What about the final stage of the encryption? I can't do that if I'm being watched by 4 men in suits every time I go to the bathroom." "You'll do it in the private lab, in the penthouse, under my supervision." "That's not protection, Alexander. That's possession." "Call it whatever you want," I whispered, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rasp. "But I've lost too much in my life to arrogance. I won't lose you to a man who thinks he can still touch what is mine." I pulled her closer, my hands sliding down to the curve of her hips, pinning her against the desk. The tension between us was no longer just the fire of Act II, it was a test of wills. She wanted her independence, and I wanted her alive. Maya reached up, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of my neck. She didn't push me away. Instead, she pulled my head down until our lips were inches apart. "You think you're testing my boundaries," she breathed, "but you're really testing yours. You're afraid that if you let me go, even for an hour, I'll realize I don't need you anymore." "I'm not afraid of you leaving, Maya. I'm afraid of you being taken." "Then show me," she challenged, her eyes dark with a sudden, sharp desire. "Show me that this is about us and not just about your need to control the board." I didn't need another invitation. I claimed her mouth with a ferocity that was meant to silence her doubts and mine. I lifted her onto the desk, the monitors flickering behind her like digital stars. The business trip was over, and the return had begun. In the middle of the sky, with the world far below, we tore at each other's boundaries until there was nothing left but the truth of our hunger. Maya POV. New York looked the same, but I was different. When the car pulled into the underground garage of Blackwood Tower, the air felt heavier. The security detail Alexander had promised was already there, 4 massive men who moved with the silent efficiency of ghosts. They didn't look at me, they looked past me, scanning the shadows for a threat I couldn't see. We rode the private elevator in silence. Alexander was back in his armor, the charcoal suit, the perfect tie, the mask of the untouchable billionaire. But I could still feel the phantom pressure of his hands on my skin from the flight. We stepped into the penthouse, and the first thing I saw was the desk in the corner of the living room. It had been transformed. 2 new high-speed servers had been installed, along with 3 monitors and a dedicated satellite link. "What is this?" I asked, dropping my bag. "Your new workstation," Alexander said, not looking at me as he checked his phone. "I've had the Sterling core moved to a localized server. You don't need to go to the 91st floor anymore. Everything you need is right here." I felt a surge of indignation. "You didn't even ask me." "I don't have to ask when it comes to the safety of the IP," he said, finally looking up. His gray eyes were cold, professional. "The audit from the night group requires a daily status report. It's more efficient if you're here." Efficient or contained? I walked over to the desk, running my fingers over the sleek black hardware. "Alexander, we talked about this on the plane. You're testing the boundaries of our agreement. I signed a contract to be your senior advisor, not your shut-in." "The contract also gives me the right to determine the work environment," he reminded me. "Now, I have a board meeting to finalize the night investment. Stay here. Marcus will bring you whatever files you need." He turned to leave, but I stepped in front of the elevator doors. "No." Alexander stopped. His eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "No. I'm coming to the office. I have a meeting with the lead engineers at 10:00 a.m. I'm not doing it over Zoom from your living room like a hidden mistress." "Maya, don't be difficult." "I'm not being difficult. I'm being the woman you said you loved. The woman you said was a partner. A partner doesn't hide when things get dangerous. A partner stands in the room." We stared at each other for a long, agonizing minute. I could see the battle happening behind his eyes. The CEO wanted me locked in a vault. The man wanted to respect the fire he had fallen in love with. "Fine," he said, his voice clipped. "But you don't walk the halls alone. One guard stays with you at all times. Even in the lab, if I find out you've ditched them, I'm locking this elevator for good. Do we have a deal?" "We have a compromise," I said, stepping aside. The day at the office was an exercise in frustration. Everywhere I went, a man named Russo followed. He stood in the corner of the lab while I argued with the engineers. He stood outside the restroom. He sat at the desk outside my glass-walled office, a silent, looming reminder that I was no longer a free agent. By 3:00 p.m., the fire of Act II was burning in my gut, but it wasn't passion, it was resentment. I was reviewing the final encryption protocols when the door to my office opened. It wasn't Alexander. It was a courier I didn't recognize, wearing a standard delivery uniform. "Package for Miss Sterling," he said, holding out a small, flat box. Russo was on his feet instantly, stepping between me and the courier. "I'll take that. Security protocol." It's just a delivery, I said, standing up. Russo took the box, his expression neutral. He opened it with a pocket knife, checking for anything suspicious. Inside was a single, vintage leather-bound book, The Art of War. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that book. It was from my father's library, the one that had been sold at auction during the takeover. Wait, I said, reaching for it. Russo checked the pages, then handed it to me. I opened the front cover. On the inside flap, in a handwriting I would know anywhere, was a single sentence. The best victory is the one where the enemy doesn't know they've been conquered. It wasn't my father's handwriting. It was Caleb's. I felt a wave of cold terror wash over me. He wasn't just in London. He was here, he was in New York, and he was sending me messages through the Blackwood security perimeter. Maya, what is it? Russo asked, sensing my shift in energy. Nothing, I lied, slamming the book shut. Just a gift from an old contact. Take it to the penthouse. I'll look at it later. I sat back down, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked toward Alexander's office. I should tell him. I should walk in there and show him the book. But if I did, the cage would close. He would use this as the ultimate proof that I needed to be locked away. He would win the boundary war, and I would become the protected asset he wanted me to be. I looked at the book in Russo's hand. Caleb was testing me. He was showing me that Alexander's walls weren't as thick as he thought. And in that moment, I realized that the boundaries being tested weren't just between me and Alexander. They were between me and the woman I was becoming. Alexander POV. The board meeting was a triumph. With the Sterling Knight investment secured, Henderson was toothless. The no confidence vote was a distant memory. I stood at the head of the table, looking at the men and women who had tried to oust me, and felt a cold sense of satisfaction. I had won. The empire was safe. But as I walked back to my office, the victory felt hollow. I kept thinking about Maya in the lab, with Russo hovering over her. I kept thinking about the look of resentment in her eyes when I told her she couldn't leave. I was protecting her. Why couldn't she see that? I pushed open the door to her office, ready to tell her the news about the board, but she wasn't there. Russo was standing by the desk, looking uncomfortable. Where is she? I demanded. In the lab, sir. She said she needed to run a final diagnostic on the recursive mapping. She told me to wait outside. And you listened to her. She's the senior advisor, sir. She was very emphatic. I didn't wait for the rest of his explanation. I headed for the 91st floor, my blood boiling. She was pushing the boundaries. She was testing the leash I had placed on her, and she was doing it in a way that put everything at risk. I reached the lab and scanned my palm. The doors slid open to reveal the high-tech interior, the blue light of the servers casting long shadows across the floor. Maya was standing at the central console, her back to me. She was focused on the screen, her fingers flying across the keys. But she wasn't working on the mapping algorithm. She was looking at a digital map of the city. A series of blinking red dots were moving through the streets of Lower Manhattan. What are you doing? I asked, my voice a low, lethal vibration. Maya didn't jump. She didn't even turn around. I'm doing what your security team failed to do, Alexander. I'm tracking the courier who brought me a package an hour ago. I walked over to her, my eyes narrowing as I looked at the screen. A package? What package? A book from Caleb. He sent it to the tower. He got it past your ghosts, Alexander. He showed me that your perimeter is a joke. She finally turned to look at me, and I saw the fear she had been hiding under her defiance. He's here, and he's not going after the code. He's going after the man who owns the room. I felt the air leave my lungs. He sent you a book. He sent me a warning. He knows that as long as you're focused on protecting me, you're not looking at your own back. He's using the boundaries you've set against us. I reached out and grabbed her shoulders, my grip tight. You should have told me the second it arrived. And what would you have done? Put me in a vault. This is exactly what he wants. He wants us fighting over my freedom so he can move through the cracks. Maya stepped closer, her chest brushing mine. Alexander, the boundaries we set, they aren't for my protection, they're for our survival, but you have to trust me. You have to let me be a part of the defense, not just the prize being defended. I looked at her, and the realization hit me like a physical blow. She was right. I had been so focused on the locked-in aspect of our relationship that I had forgot she was the one who knew the enemy best. I had been treating her like an asset to be guarded, instead of a partner to be leaned on. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "Don't be sorry, be smart." She pointed to the screen. "The courier is heading toward a warehouse in Red Hook. It's owned by a subsidiary of Vane Global. If we move now, we can catch the leak." "Oh, we," she said, her chin tilted up. "You want to protect me, then take me with you. Let me show you that I'm not the one who needs a leash." Maya POV. The drive to Brooklyn was a blur of high-speed adrenaline. Alexander was driving the SUV, his eyes fixed on the GPS. 2 security vehicles followed us, their sirens silent but their intent clear. Russo was in the passenger seat, his hand on his weapon. I sat in the back, my laptop open, tracking the signal from the courier's vehicle. The business trip had evolved into a search and destroy mission. "We're 3 minutes out," Alexander said, his voice cold and focused. "Russo, you take point on the perimeter. I'm going in with the primary team." "And Miss Sterling?" Russo asked. "She stays in the vehicle with the tech support. She provides the digital eyes." I opened my mouth to protest, but Alexander looked at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes weren't cold anymore, they were a silent plea. "Please, give me this much." I nodded. "I could draw the line here." I would be the eyes, but I would stay in the car. We pulled up to the warehouse, a crumbling brick structure on the edge of the water. It looked abandoned, but the heat signatures on my screen told a different story. There were 6 people inside. One of them was stationary in the center of the building. "He's in there," I whispered into the comms. "Caleb, Level 1, Central Office." Alexander stepped out of the car, his movements sharp and lethal. He was wearing a tactical vest over his dress shirt, a combination that should have looked ridiculous but instead looked terrifying. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who was done playing games. I watched the live feed from the security team's body cams. The warehouse was filled with old crates and rusted machinery. The team moved in a diamond formation, clearing each corner with surgical precision. Then the comms went static. "Alexander, talk to me." I shouted into the headset, nothing but white noise. I looked at my laptop. The heat signatures were flickering. A jamming signal had been activated. Someone had anticipated the raid. "Russo, the comms are down, get in there." I yelled to the guard standing by my door. Russo didn't hesitate. He signaled to the second vehicle and they moved toward the entrance. I was alone in the SUV. I stared at the dark warehouse, my heart thudding against my ribs. The boundaries I had fought so hard for, the independence, the partnership, they didn't matter now. Only one thing mattered. Alexander was in there and he was blind. I grabbed a spare headset and a tactical tablet from the front seat. I wasn't a soldier, I wasn't a guard, but I was the one who knew the layout of Vane's subsidiaries. I knew where the back doors were, literally and figuratively. I stepped out of the car and into the cold Brooklyn air. The warehouse door was slightly ajar. I slipped inside, the smell of grease and stagnant water hitting me like a slap. I kept my back to the wall, my eyes fixed on the tablet. I could see the interference pattern of the jammer. It was coming from the second floor. I moved through the shadows, my breath hitching at every sound. I reached the stairs and began to climb, each step a testament to the fear I was overriding. I reached the top of the stairs and saw him. Caleb was standing by a central server rack, a tablet in his hand. He wasn't looking at a map. He was looking at a live feed of the first floor. He was watching Alexander move through the office below, and he was holding a remote detonator. "Caleb," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my legs. He turned, a slow, sickening smile spreading across his face. "Maya, I knew you couldn't resist a good mystery. I told Julian you'd be the one to find the breadcrumbs." "Put it down, Caleb. The building is surrounded. You're finished." "Surrounded? Maybe. But Alexander is currently standing over a pressurized gas main that I've rigged to bypass the safety valves. If I press this button, the steward becomes a memory, and you and we go back to the way things were." "There is no us, Caleb. There never was. You were just a ghost I forgot to bury." "A ghost?" He stepped closer, the detonator glinting in the dim light. "I'm the only one who knows the real you, Maya, not this polished, silk-wearing version Blackwood has created. I know the girl who wanted to change the world. He just wants to own it." "He doesn't own me," I said, taking a step toward him. "He loves me, and that's something you'll never understand." "Love is a boundary, Maya, and I'm about to break it." He moved his thumb toward the button. I didn't think. I lunged at him, my tablet hitting his wrist. The detonator skittered across the concrete floor. Caleb growled and grabbed my throat, his fingers digging into my skin. I couldn't breathe, the world turning into a blur of gray and red. Then the door behind us exploded. Alexander was there. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't use a tactic. He used the raw, unadulterated fury of a man who was seeing his world under attack. He hit Caleb with the force of a freight train, throwing him off me and against the server rack. I slumped to the floor, gasping for air. Alexander didn't stop. He was on top of Caleb, his fists moving in a rhythmic, violent blur. He wasn't the CEO. He wasn't the billionaire. He was a man who was tearing apart the person who had dared to touch me. "Alexander, stop." I managed to shout, my voice a ragged whisper. "He's down. Alexander, look at me." He stopped, his hand pulled back for another strike. He was breathing heavily, his face splattered with Caleb's blood, his eyes wild. He looked at me, and I saw the mask shatter completely. He looked terrified. He scrambled off Caleb and gathered me into his arms, pulling me against his chest so hard I could barely breathe. "Maya. God, Maya, I thought," when the comms went out. "I'm okay," I whispered, burying my face in his neck. "I'm okay, you caught him." Alexander POV. I held her until the police arrived. I held her until Caleb was led away in chains. I held her until the warehouse was empty and the sun began to rise over the Brooklyn Bridge. I had almost lost her. The boundaries I had built to protect her had almost become her tomb. If she hadn't ditched Russo, if she hadn't followed her own instincts, I would be standing in a pile of rubble right now. We sat on the bumper of the SUV, the morning light casting long shadows across the water. I had wrapped my blazer around her shoulders, her small frame swallowed by the expensive wool. "You broke the rules," I said, my voice rough. "I saved your life," she countered, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I know." I looked at her, seeing the woman who had faced a detonator to protect me. "I was wrong, Maya, about the cage, about the workstation, about everything. You were just afraid." I was terrified. I took her hand, my fingers tracing the marks Caleb's fingers had left on her neck. My blood boiled at the sight, but I forced myself to be gentle. I thought if I could just control the environment, I could control the outcome. But you're not an outcome, you're a person, and you're the most formidable partner I could have asked for. So what now? Back to the penthouse, back to the locked-in claws. I looked at the city skyline, the empire I had built, the towers that bore my name. It all looked different now. No more clauses, I said. The boundaries are gone. From now on, the only thing that locks you in is me, and only if you want to be. Maya smiled, a slow, beautiful expression that made the morning light look dull. She reached up and kissed me, a soft, lingering touch that tasted of salt and survival. I think I can live with those terms, she whispered. We drove back to Manhattan in silence, but it wasn't the dangerous silence of before. It was the silence of two people who had finally found the balance between power and love. Act II was fire. And as we watched the sun rise over the city, I realized that we hadn't just survived the flames. We had become the fire. The world was still out there, the board, the press, the rivals, but they didn't matter. Because inside the black SUV, in the center of the world, Alexander Blackwood had finally realized that the only thing worth owning was the heart of the woman sitting beside him. And that was a victory that no one could ever take away. Next chapter, chapter 20, she pushes back.